The ceasefire between America and Iran is not built to last. From the moment it was announced, multiple versions of the same deal were already circulating online, even between the Persian and English texts. The United States says the truce depends on Iran's compliance, while Iran presents it as an agreement built around its own terms. At the same time, Israel rejects key elements outright, especially regarding Lebanon, where fighting continues. These are not marginal disagreements, and they come on top of pre-existing complications such as Iran's nuclear program, its missile arsenal, and its drone capabilities. A ceasefire requires a shared understanding of terms, but here there are none. More importantly, the fundamentals of the conflict remain unchanged. Trump entered the war with specific objectives in mind, while Iran pursued its own set of aims. Neither side has achieved those goals in any decisive way, and neither side has given them up. And even as the ceasefire takes hold, the military posture tells a different story. More than 70 transport planes landed in the Middle East within 24 hours of the truce, and over 50,000 troops are now deployed across the periphery, with numbers still rising. What's more, 3 aircraft carriers, the USS Bush, the USS Ford, and the USS Boxer, are all set to converge in the region just as the ceasefire is due to expire. The pieces are falling into place. At this moment, more than ever, watch what they do, not what they say. Meanwhile, Trump appears to be trying to contain tensions with China amid reports that Beijing may be supplying air defense systems to Iran. Roughly 3 dozen sources have picked up the story, but it's difficult to pin down what's actually happening. Each source presents a different version of events. This is exactly why I use Ground News, today's sponsor. It's the best tool for staying objective in my reporting. Ground News lets me instantly see how the coverage splits. While left-leaning outlets call Trump's statement a threat, most right-leaning sources frame it as a warning. Same story seen through 2 different realities. With Ground News, however, I cut through that because they pull in coverage from local and international sources and put it in one easy-to-read feed, letting me quickly see every angle of the story and get to the truth. And the color-coded layout makes it easy to filter for high factuality sources, see political bias, or filter for the geographic origin of each source. On developing stories like this, Ground News provides clarity you don't find anywhere else. Because I believe in Ground News so much, we're offering you 40% off the same Vantage plan that I use for my research. Just click the link in the description or go to ground.news/Caspian. It's one of the biggest discounts they've ever offered. The most immediate shift has been in the Strait of Hormuz. Shipping has resumed, but not under the same conditions as before. Iran now controls the flow. Tankers move through an IRGC-managed corridor, often requiring prior coordination and, in some cases, payment. Iran is reportedly charging $1 for every barrel of oil that passes through the strait, paid in cryptocurrency or yuan. With a typical tanker carrying around 2 million barrels, that comes out to roughly $2 million per passage. In relative terms, that's a modest cost, one most countries and shipping firms can come to terms with. So this might actually stick, because the idea of going to war with Iran or just paying a small fee is a no-brainer. For Iran, however, the same arrangement produces a very different outcome. At 2024 flow levels, between 15 and 20 fully loaded tankers passed through the strait each day. At roughly $2 million per vessel, that translates into $30 to $40 million daily, or about 11 to 14 billion annually. That is a massive windfall, one that would make the Strait of Hormuz the most profitable toll system on the planet, surpassing even the Suez Canal. To put things into perspective, that level of income is comparable to the annual military budgets of smaller regional states. For Iran, it would provide enough cash flow to finance reconstruction, replenish military stockpiles, and absorb the costs of the war within a relatively short period of time. But the financial aspect is only part of it, and not even the most important part. Control over the Strait of Hormuz is above all a source of leverage. It allows Iran to influence not just whether oil flows, but how it flows. It can slow traffic, prioritize certain shipments, or create uncertainty without fully closing the waterway. In practice, it would grant Iran an extraordinary ability to shape global energy prices, perhaps more so than any other country. But that wasn't the original focus of the war, at least not until Iran turned the Strait of Hormuz into a pressure point. You see, America entered the war with a specific set of objectives: restrain Iran's nuclear program, secure or remove its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, reduce its missile capabilities, weaken its proxy networks, and seek regime change. But once Iran disrupted shipping in the strait, restoring access to it quickly became a central goal. Yet, none of the predefined objectives have been achieved in any decisive way. Iran's nuclear program remains largely intact. Its key facilities were built to withstand air campaigns. The Fordow enrichment plant, for instance, is buried deep inside mountainous terrain, in some cases up to 80 or 90 meters underground. These are not targets that can be eliminated through conventional strikes alone. At most, the war has set the Iranians back, but not in a way they can't recover from. Missiles and drones present a similar problem. Iran has lost equipment, but not the facilities and supply chains that produce it. The infrastructure is dispersed, often concealed, and designed for continuity. There is no centralized factory that can be shut down, which means it can be rebuilt. In previous conflicts, missile inventories were replenished within months, and there is little reason to assume this time will be different. Iran's proxy networks also remain in place. They have taken losses, but they are decentralized by design. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, and other groups operate autonomously, each with its own leadership, funding, and supply lines. That decentralized structure makes them resilient. Pressure in one area does not eliminate the others. Meanwhile, the government in Tehran has not shifted either. There has been no collapse, no fragmentation, and no visible move toward internal change. If anything, the IRGC has expanded its influence. It has consolidated political power and sidelined any remaining moderate faction. The result is that we may yet see an even more uncompromising Iran, with fewer internal constraints than before. The only domain where US operations had a clear impact was at sea. Iran's navy took enormous losses, with multiple large surface vessels sunk, including frigates, corvettes, and at least one submarine. Key naval bases along the southern coast, near Bandar Abbas and Chabahar, were struck early in the campaign, destroying ships at port before they could disperse. In sum, the majority of Iran's larger warships have been taken out of action. That being said, Iran's naval strategy does not depend on those ships. Its maritime power is built around smaller mobile units, naval mines, and coastal missile systems. These assets are harder to track and better suited to the geography of the Gulf, where shallow waters and proximity to the Iranian coast limit the range of larger fleets. That environment favors area denial over dominance, something Iran recognized early on. So the Iranians do not need to control the sea in the conventional sense, they only need to make movement through it risky enough to shape behavior. This then helps explain the conflict's outcome. The United States applied sustained pressure through airstrikes in an attempt to force Iran to concede or change course. In just 40 days, the US struck more than 13,000 targets across the country, and even though rebuilding the civilian infrastructure may take decades, the Iranians never flinched. They absorbed the pressure, retained much of their deterrent capabilities, and kept most of the government intact. In fact, Iran emerged with a stronger hand, with the Strait of Hormuz now effectively under its control. From the American perspective, however, this creates a mismatch. The objectives have not changed. Washington still aims to restrain Iran's nuclear program, secure or remove its stockpile of highly enriched uranium, reduce its missile capabilities, and weaken its proxy networks. Goals that have defined the campaign from the outset. However, despite weeks of sustained operations, Trump is no closer to achieving those objectives than he was before the war. The ceasefire that is now in effect does not reconcile those positions. The war may have ended, but the reasons for it remain. Diplomats from the US and Iran are set to meet in Islamabad and work out the terms of a lasting arrangement. But the ceasefire may ultimately amount to little more than a short pause between phases of the conflict. There are persistent gaps between the main positions of Washington and Tehran, especially around America's primary demands. These are not side issues. They go to the heart of Iran's deterrence and sovereignty. Additionally, both sides are entering the talks claiming victory, which makes compromise less likely. Instead of concessions, they are starting with maximalist demands, and Iran's proposal reflects that exactly. Tehran is calling for full sanctions relief, formalized transit fees through the Strait of Hormuz to finance reconstruction, and a broader regional ceasefire extending to fronts like Lebanon. US officials have dismissed the proposal as not good enough, while still acknowledging it as a significant step. But even where their positions overlap, turning that into something workable is difficult. Full sanctions relief, for example, is not something that can be delivered quickly. Parts of the US sanctions regime require congressional approval, which creates legal and bureaucratic barriers. So, even if Trump were willing, he may not be able to move at the pace the negotiations would require. The Strait of Hormuz is another sticking point. The United States is unlikely to accept any deal that effectively legitimizes Iranian control over the waterway without a clear enforcement mechanism. The strait is a critical artery for global energy markets, and any perception that it is being ceded to a single actor runs against long-standing norms of free transit. Iran, however, sees its hold over the strait as a strategic asset, and relinquishing it now would mean surrendering one of the few clear advantages it gained from the war. That gap is difficult to close. Ballistic missiles are another point of friction. Iran has consistently treated its missile program as non-negotiable. After the destruction of parts of its conventional forces, missiles and drones have now become the backbone of its deterrence. Accepting limits, whether on range or capability, would undercut that posture, and there is little indication Tehran is willing to do so. Meanwhile, the ceasefire itself has built-in weaknesses. It's unclear whether Lebanon is included, and that ambiguity can be exploited. If Iran accepts a deal that leaves Lebanon out, it risks appearing to abandon Hezbollah. If it refuses to move forward without it, the talks could collapse. Either way, it adds instability. Israel's position adds another layer. The Israelis are likely to oppose or actively undermine any agreement that preserves Iran's deterrent or regional posture. From its perspective, such a deal is not a solution, but a delay that would eventually come back to haunt it. Which is why senior Israeli officials have already denounced the ceasefire as a political disaster. That stance carries its own risks. It raises the likelihood of unilateral Israeli action, either to undermine the negotiations or to continue striking Iranian-linked assets outside the ceasefire framework. If negotiations do fail, the consequences could be immediate. Both sides still have plenty of targets and would likely escalate to increase pressure. For the United States, that could mean widening strikes beyond military sites to include critical infrastructure. Think of power plants, desalination facilities, and other systems that sustain daily life. Ground operations would also become more plausible as the necessary forces would already be in place. That last point is already visible in the background. America's military buildup has not stopped. US tanker aircraft continue to operate across the region, and even more assets are being brought in from Europe. All the while, additional marine units are still being deployed to the Middle East. All of this suggests Washington is preparing for the possibility that diplomacy fails. If that happens, if hostilities resume, America may look for ways to strengthen its position before returning to the negotiating table for a second round. One option would be to seize one of Iran's offshore islands. Karg Island is of particular strategic value. It's the linchpin of Iran's economy. Capturing it would be the next best thing to marching into Tehran, and it might be enough to shift the balance. But it won't be easy. Any attempt to hold the island would come at a heavy cost, and the fight could quickly turn into a massacre. Both America and Iran know precisely where this path goes. The only question is whether they go with it. I've been your host Shervan from CaspianReport. If you enjoy these videos, consider supporting the channel on Patreon and click the bell icon so the next one doesn't slip past you. Thank you for your time and Sal.